Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gear Priority Podcast. My name is Justin, and I'm joined by Lloyd from Garage Growing Gear for this partnered episode where we are going to be chatting with the founder of the company behind the Kula Cloth, one of the coolest outdoor products out there and driving leave no trace principles and sustainability. Lloyd and I will be chatting with Anastasia Allison about how she balances running a business and selling a product with doing good for the environment and community. As a lot of people might think, those two things can potentially work against each other, but we're going to get into that. Welcome, Anastasia. Where are you calling in from? You have a nice background there.
I am joining you from my home in Granite Falls, Washington State.
Nice. I'm jealous of the real trees that you have in your
They're
background.
very real trees behind me.
Fake trees.
The drywall behind me is also very jealous.
Yeah. How's it going, Lloyd? It's been a month since we hopped on the podcast together.
It has been a month. It's been good. You know, it feels like the busy time of year where people are gearing up for nicer weather. So it feels like, yeah, Garage Growing's been bumping. I've been trying to, get my brain on what my summer schedule and trips are going to look like, which is a welcome reprieve from Minnesota winter.
Awesome. That's great. And well, as usual with the Garage Growing Gear partner episodes, we'll have maybe some sneak peeks at what might be coming down the pipe from Garage Growing Gear at the end of the episode. So stay tuned for that. But let's jump in straight to the rapid fire questions so we can get to know you better, Anastasia. We didn't send you these beforehand. I don't know if you'd listened to any of the episodes, but some of the questions do line up. We're kind of building a little bit of a database with some of the responses. So we'll see. We'll see what you have to say. I think we're starting off with Lloyd asking the first question.
Okay, Anastasia. I know that you're a very dynamic, multifaceted, outdoorsy human. So I'd like to take that multifaceted nature and limit it to a two response to this question, which is, what are your two favorite outdoors activities?
Riding my motorcycle and backpacking.
You ride your motorcycle to backpacking?
I have not done that yet, but I have a dual sport and I am planning to do a motorcycle backpacking trip this summer. So probably not quite as rustic as an actual backpacking trip, but I'm excited to try it out.
Nice. Anastasia, I invested in a moped this past year, the urban motorcycle, as one would. And it's honestly been it's revolutionized my commuting to work. It feels like it brings joy to the process of rapid transportation. It's wonderful.
It is. If
I could really see you on a moped,
yeah.
Lloyd.
Yeah, I look at me.
Yeah.
I feel like this is going to be the start of maybe a little bit of a challenge between us, but I would love to maybe set up a race between us. I ride a Ducati, a Ducati Monster versus a moped. I think.
How fast does your motorcycle go?
I don't know. It might have a top speed of around 170, but I've never gotten it there.
Well, my moped's max speed is about 45 miles an hour. So I would love to race you and lose. That would be my distinct victory and honor.
I look forward to it.
That's awesome. I love where these rapid fire questions go. rapid fire.
Could this be a Kula Academy event? Like a live stream?
I think it could. A live stream of Garage Growing Gear's Lloyd versus Anastasia from Kula Cloth. Track days.
Yeah, track days.
Okay.
That'd be great. All right. So I think I mentioned that you're the founder of Kula Cloth, and on the Kula Cloth website, a bunch of the people that you work with have fun titles like the P Cloth Fairy and the Director of Chaos and Fun. Yours just, it says founder next to it, which is great, but do you have an unofficial title that maybe is used around the company?
I would sort of call myself, I guess if I were to pick a title, it would be dancer and cookie baker. And I honestly think of myself, and maybe this is, getting far out into the woo, but I often call myself the abundance like holder, like I really see my job as like just staying in alignment with like the greater vision for Kula Cloth. Like that is my job. If I sink into fear or worry or doubt, that ripples down to the people that I work with. And so I really feel like my biggest purpose is just to maintain this really high energy of playfulness and fun and creativity and abundance. And like when you do that, it filters down into everything. And it's so maybe like abundance frequency holder. That's so woo. Oh my gosh, so woo.
That's a good one. I think that fits right in with all the other titles that are on there. That's great.
And just like resonates so much with, I feel like the outward projection of Kula, where it just comes across as such like a genuine voice, like such like I don't know, like such a welcoming. So yeah, whatever title that you have, it seems like you're doing a good job of
Hope
that.
so.
Other rapid fire question. You mentioned about not, trying not to be fearful in that. But any fears that you have in particular of things in the outdoors that you encounter?
I had a experience in Canyonlands where it was very, very obvious that a cougar had killed a deer. I mean, literally within like feet of our campsite. The carcass was still there. It was really picked over, but this was an extremely remote area in Canyonlands, and I could not sleep that night. And I remember just laying in my sleeping bag, in this tent, right? And it's made of like Dyneema or something. And thinking about this cougar out there, and I just laid there thinking, like, I am literally a burrito. Like, there is nothing stopping this cougar from just eating me. And I could not sleep at all. So I will say occasionally I have had like a fear of cougars in the backcountry. But for the most part, I feel pretty good when I'm outside.
That's a good way to be. I know I talk to a lot of people through the YouTube channel who have one of their biggest hindrances for getting out backpacking and hiking is fear, and they have a lot of fear for a lot of different things. So do you have a strategy for dealing with fear, or is that just kind of ingrained in your?
No, I do have a strategy, and the strategy, it's simple, but it's often something that we don't do. It's really just coming back to the present moment and recognizing that most of the things that we're afraid of are imaginary situations that haven't actually happened. Even if I'm laying there being fearful of a cougar, that's not wrong. But really what I'm afraid of is the imaginary cougar in my head. There's actually no danger. When I'm in my tent in my sleeping bag, the cougar isn't there. I'm the one creating the cougar that's attacking me in my head. And so anytime you can come into the present moment, I will oftentimes say to myself things like, I'm okay right now. Like right now, everything's okay. I'm here. I'm breathing. I did have a panic attack once in a snow cave. I never realize that I was claustrophobic until I spent the night in a snow cave, and about halfway through the night realized that I was on the side of Mount Rainier, which is, active-ish volcano. I was like, oh man, if it shifts a little bit, we're in trouble. And I sort of like had this like fear, and I just remember laying there in the middle of the night and just taking deep breaths, focusing on my breathing. And I have a regular meditation practice, and I think meditation is exercising your mind. And when you begin to meditate, you become the awareness of your thoughts. And so instead of your thoughts being 100% real and identifying completely with your fear, you can step back and like watch your brain and the program thinking and separate yourself from that and say, oh, like this is my brain creating this, but I'm okay. I'm okay. And, that applies in all areas of life. And I think the outdoors is such a great teacher of those skills too.
Yeah, that's a great perspective too. Yeah,
that really resonates. Like I also will sometimes, like, when you're in a tent at night, every little sound you hear makes you think that there's something outside. And I will frequently, especially when I'm by myself, I'll kind of like, I'll close my eyes and I'll try to like zoom out from the tent that I'm in to kind of just like leave the walls, but kind of like try to see myself from above, and like almost like a drone that's kind of zooming out, and realize that I'm just in this tent, in this forest, in this beautiful space. And I'm like not trapped in this tiny little one person tent, but in reality, like I'm totally fine. I'm just surrounded by trees and nature. And, the farther the farther I zoom out, the smaller I feel and the more comfortable I feel in that space. And that often kind of like, grounds me in that presentness, which I feel like we're all trying to do when we're going outside, and we kind of forget it when we're trying to go sleep.
You are totally right. Yeah. Sleep is sort of, and also, when we sleep in our beds at home, we're so insulated from like our natural instinct. I think, a long time ago when people didn't live in their comfortable houses, you might have had to sleep with one eye open and kind of have this sense of alertness. And we're sleeping in these comfortable beds now. We've lost that like kind of primal instinct of like being a little bit like conscientious of what's going on around us. And so we go outside and I feel like that part of us begins to wake up again. And it's something that we're just not comfortable with.
Yep, definitely. To bring it back to basics with the fourth question, a little bit less. Maybe we'll get a little bit more philosophical with this question as well. I'm curious to see where it goes. Maybe we won't. We'll see. But when you're out on a backpacking trip, do you use a backcountry bidet, toilet paper, or are you like Lloyd and you're using rocks and sticks to kind of? I'm guessing you just kind of scoop things out, or I haven't used that method. So, and Lloyd hasn't explained it in detail, but curious to hear what you have to say.
So I have used a leaf before, but it was only in an emergency. I typically pack toilet paper and I will often pack wet wipes. However, I will say that I do always pack everything out. So I have a separate trash bag. So I never leave any dirty paper in the backcountry. I never bury any dirty toilet paper. And on longer trips, I do add in a bidet if it is warm enough out that I feel like squirting myself with water. Like on a cold winter trip in the Cascades, the bidet is not coming out unless I want, icicle butt or something.
Yeah, that's the tough part is if you're not on a morning routine and you haven't allowed your water to kind of warm up throughout the evening, if it's summertime and you're just getting fresh glacier water, that's
painful.
That's not the best feeling. Yeah, exactly.
That requires a certain appreciation for a level of masochism that I'm not willing to partake
in. Yeah, exactly. Lloyd, you're still the only rock and stick user out of all of the people who have been on the podcast so far. So we'll see. We'll have to get Andrew Skirk on. I think he's a rock user.
That is hardcore, Lloyd.
I'm honored. I'm glad to be able to represent this portion of our population.
It's like one.
I would like to say that this is something that I discovered, but honestly, like this is just how I was like told that this was supposed to be.
That's amazing.
So like you look for smooth rocks, you look for sticks that don't have too many bumps, and you like just try to make it work.
Wow.
Andrew Skirk has a YouTube video about it where he gets very detailed and like goes through his rock selection process and stick selection process, and then gets into the position, shows the 3 different positions that he likes to use. It's an underrated video. I don't think it has nearly as many views as it should, but definitely go check that out, everyone. So let's kind of jump into a little bit about Kula Cloth, because I think there's a really interesting story here. So what was the origin of Kula Cloth? The origin story, and kind of what problem did you see that you wanted to solve with that product?
Yeah, so I started backpacking back in the early 2000s and knew absolutely nothing about how to handle hygiene in the backcountry. In fact, my first backpacking trip ever, I did not bring toilet paper. because I didn't know that I needed to bring it. I guess I just assumed there'd be a toilet back there somewhere with toilet paper, and was so embarrassed when I realized my mistake that I ended up stealing toilet paper from my tent mate. And not just like figuratively stealing, but like actually going into her backpack when she wasn't there and like secretively removing toilet paper. And so I had sort of already had this kind of traumatic experience around not knowing what to do with hygiene. I got into backpacking pretty seriously. I was also a park ranger, and I ended up teaching backpacking for an organization called Washington Outdoor Women, which is a nonprofit in Washington. I was out on a backpacking trip in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness and kind of came around a corner, and there was just a giant pile of dirty toilet paper laying there. And I remember thinking, this is just so unsightly and disgusting. And I went home from that trip and I Googled leave no trace options for toilet paper. And this article, ironically enough, popped up on Andrew Skirka's website about using a pea cloth as a toilet paper alternative. And my first sort of initial response to reading that was, oh my gosh, that's disgusting. Like, who would ever use a pea cloth? But I was teaching backpacking at the time. And so I thought, I should at least kind of vet this idea, see if I like it. And then if I did, maybe I could teach my students. So I bought a blue piece of fabric on Amazon, just this little piece of microfiber. And I started carrying it on my backpacking trips as a pea cloth. And I was shocked to discover that I loved it. I mean, it was a total game changer for me. I was more comfortable. I wasn't having to pack in and out a ton of toilet paper. And especially on long backpacking trips, if you are somebody who squats when you pee, your options are either drip dry, which leaves you pretty swampy after a few days, or packing in and out just like sort of ridiculous amounts of toilet paper to use. And I didn't like those options. So the pea cloth was like a game changer. I started telling all my students, you have to, go buy a piece of fabric. It could be, have this pea cloth. Well, a couple of years later, I was on another backpacking trip in the Wind River Range, and I was actually taking photographs of my ugly blue pea cloth as a joke. I had this idea that I was going to make a series of greeting cards to send to a friend with my pea cloth on it. I don't know what that says about me as a friend. But as just to set the stage, I am in the Wind River Range, high on the Continental Divide. I was doing the Wind River High Route, and it is probably one of the most spectacular sunsets of my life. And there I am setting my pea cloth up on a trekking pole to get a photo of it. And I'm, posing this photograph and getting the composition right. And it was like the mountain gods just sort of sent me a lightning bolt that just said, why isn't that a real piece of gear, Anastasia? And it literally just sort of felt like it came out of nowhere, like a gift. And I remember thinking, oh, I wonder if anybody's ever done that. Like, why isn't that a real piece of gear? And I thought, I bet, the issue that I had when I told people about the pea cloth is that they would always get squeamish, right? They don't want to use just some disgusting piece of fabric. And I remember thinking, I wonder if it was designed to do that. Like, maybe more people would be less grossed out. And then more people would be like open to this idea of using reusable toilet paper for peeing. And so I went home from that trip. I was super jazzed about the idea, and kind of did a little bit of research into it, and then quickly got scared away from the idea. I was like, oh no, I can't afford this. I don't know how to sew. I don't know how to start a business. I was a railroad police officer at the time. Long story, but I had gotten laid off from my park ranger job. So I'm now working as a railroad cop. I was like, nobody's going to buy this. Why would somebody ever buy a pea cloth? And so I kind of dropped the idea. And in January of 2017, I was involved in a near-death experience, for lack of a better term. And we were talking about fear during the rapid fire questions. Well, I realized that when I had been kind of thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, which was, I love the outdoors. That's what I wanted to do, was something to contribute to the outdoor community. I looked at all the reasons why I wasn't doing that and realized that I was afraid. And I looked at this moment, this near-death experience, and realized that in that moment, I hadn't been afraid. It was like this surreal, weird experience, but like there was no fear because I was so present in that moment that there was no space for fear to exist. And I realized that I was the one holding myself back from doing anything. And so I started an online hiking group. I mean, that near-death experience was literally the catalyst for everything that followed. I realized I needed to change how I was living my life. I was very negative. I started a meditation practice. I started a gratitude practice. I mean, it was like I did a whole 180. And during that time period is when this idea for the pea cloth that I had had the previous year kind of popped back up, except this time I wasn't afraid anymore. Like, what did I have to lose? Like, what do you have to lose? Okay, so your pea cloth company fails. Okay. I mean, like, you didn't die. There are worse things that could happen than a pea cloth company failing. And so I didn't know how to sew, but I remember thinking, well, I know people who know how to sew. And so I called them and said, how would I sew this thing that I have in my head? And they helped me. And the first couple ones that I made looked terrible. They're just like shapes sewed together. But eventually, I kept practicing and I kept practicing. And finally, they were squares. And I started doing research on fabric and contacting fabric mills. And then I started Googling things like, how do I find a place that will make things for me? And I ended up finding a factory. And it was like this sort of avalanche of momentum going in this direction, and everything just sort of like, I lived most of my life thinking I needed to know all the answers, but this time it was like the answers were coming to me because I knew that they were out there somewhere. And it was really neat to watch that all come together. And then in July of 2018, I officially launched the Kula Cloth website on my personal Facebook page. And I opened it up with pre-orders for a product that I did not even have yet. I mean, in retrospect, it is wild to me that I had the audacity to do that. But it all worked out, and I started shipping out the first pre-orders in November of 2018. And Garage Grown Gear was our very first retailer ever in human history. And in fact, Lloyd met me on the steps of Outdoor Retailer, and I had a backpack full of hand-sewed by me Kula Cloths that I showed to him. I was a hustler back then. And I remember Lloyd saying, someday when these are actually like a real product, we're going to buy them. And so it's just been a journey ever since. And now Kula is, sold all over the world and in big stores. And my employees would laugh if they heard me say this because I use this word all the time, but it has been an odyssey.
Well, Anastasia, it's so amazing. It's hard not to see Kula Cloths on trail. Really, wherever you are, it's amazing. Just to see how popular and how much people want to be able to identify with the community around Kula. That you've turned something that is, a fairly at its core a basic product and made it something that is something that's really celebrated. Yeah. And that's it's hard to think about other products in the outdoor space that have that when you see someone who has that product, that there's such like an immediate connection between those two people.
That excites me so much. The word Kula actually means community. And I very, very early on, I had this whiteboard in my office and I wrote, this vision like Kula, a Kula on every backpack and people waving at other people with a Kula. And I sort of think about there's other communities out there. I'm a part of the motorcycling community. And anytime you pass another motorcycle or moped, you wave. Like I wave in mopeds, and like there's this sense of,
Most
oh,
motorcyclists
I
don't.
would. I wave at anybody on 2 or 3 wheels. And there's this sense of community that like bridges any differences between humans. And to me, that's really exciting. I mean, I hear stories all the time of people meeting friends because they saw somebody with a Kula, and it's just this instant connection. And I think that is the important, there's like 2 important parts of Kula. There's the leave no trace, the sustainability aspect of it. But then there's this like ripple effect of like good and connection and love that can also be simultaneously shared. And I think both of those are so important.
That's interesting, especially because you mentioned, I think you mentioned 2 things that are important to Kula that aren't the product necessarily. And I think that's something that I find really interesting is with a lot of companies, they have their product and everything else is to drive that product. Whereas when I look at Kula and the vibe I get and everything it's basically everything's kind of together. It's all like the community, the product, the values are all kind of in the same silo and not in separate silos, which I find really enjoyable.
I agree with you. And one of the things that just warms my heart is when I hear people say things like, I came here to buy a pea cloth and now I'm dancing every day and, I'm meeting new friends, I'm meditating, I'm taking art classes, I'm more creative than I've ever been in my life. And to know that this tiny pea cloth can have that type of an effect on people's lives, like that is what personally drives me. I feel like the gear is fantastic, and for some people it will literally be just a piece of gear. They will buy the Kula Cloth, it will be a utilitarian product, it will make them more comfortable on the trail, and that will be it. But for other people it is sort of like access to something more, right? Like a deeper connection with themselves in some way, or a way to feel included or feel like they belong as part of a group. And that's what really excites me.
Well, I think that's such a cool thing because I feel like, yeah, like everyone in outdoor spaces is looking for deeper connection with themselves, with others. Like, why can one not foster that within the gear they
Yeah.
bring? Like, yeah. And I know, Anastasia, that Justin wants to ask you a bunch of technical
Oh,
questions
let's
about
do the
Kula Cloth,
technical
so I'm
questions.
asking you, well, I want to ask you one more
Yeah.
question that's not technical. So you said, like, what's the worst case thing that could happen? Like a pea cloth company fails. Like, was there a moment with Kula where you knew that you really had something, like both from like a product standpoint as well as kind of from this community? Was there a moment where you're like, oh, this thing is solid? Like this thing, like I feel like this is something that I can really like do something.
I truly have felt that since the very beginning. Like there was such an intensity to the creation of the product that like it was like I couldn't not do it. It was like it was coming from, I mean, as corny as it sounds, it was like coming from the universe itself. For some reason, I was, selected to make this product come to life. And so there was like no denying in my heart that I had to do this and it was important to me. I do know that there were moments of doubt for me. When you quit your job to start a company that makes a product that is designed to absorb urine, it would be only natural that one would have some fears around that. And there was a few moments after I had left my job and kind of jumped into this full time where that may have involved me lying in the fetal position on the ground crying. And I remember thinking prior to launching it, Anastasia, there's sort of 2 things that are going to happen here. Number 1 is that you are going to become sort of the laughing stock of the outdoor industry when you launch this product, or people are going to think you're brilliant, right? Like, so there's two options. Either way, you're going to go down in a blaze of glory. So like you have nothing to lose. And I remember I launched the company and I was literally sick to my stomach. I announced it on my personal Facebook page. And within 1 minute, I had a pre-order from a friend, and her comment in her order was, "Anastasia, you're brilliant." And I was like, it was like the universe had been like, "Good job. You have chosen wisely, Anastasia." And it was just a special moment. I really feel like the thing that has kept me both sane and centered when running Kula is like never needing to be anywhere different than I am. I think in business, if you get caught up in the chasing and needing of external validation and success and numbers and everything that we are led to believe is like the most important part, it is this never ending chase of like, I'll be happy when XYZ happens, and it is exhausting, and you will never be happy because you're actually pushing happiness off to a distant place that isn't actually real. And so I think for me, Kula has been sort of about being where I am and just being really grateful for that and enjoying it. And so honestly, like every day, I just feel like, I get to wake up and dance with people in the Kula community and pack orders and write notes to customers. And I think not needing to be anywhere else only contributes to being open to all the ways in which Kula can continue to grow.
Yeah, that's I love that perspective. It's something that I've been thinking about and working on a lot, is like the enough factor. And it sounds like you kind of hit that enough factor with that first comment from a friend who said you're brilliant, and then you've just been building, but things have been like, it's always kind of been enough, and you're not chasing those other things, which, like you mentioned, aren't always the most productive or good for mental health and things like that.
No.
I'm curious. You mentioned like with the community and everything, how many Kula Cloths are out there in the world right now?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I would say hundreds of thousands at this point, easily. I don't have like exact numbers, but definitely in the hundreds of thousands of Kulas at this point, which is like totally wild. I remember talking to Amy, the co-founder of Garage Grown Gear, early on, and I told her in my first year, my goal, I was like, I want to sell 10,000 Kula Cloths. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? That's crazy. And I somehow did it. And I sort of approach things in a really non-traditional way, probably not surprising to anybody at this point in the podcast episode. But instead of having like specific targets of numbers, which I think limits me a little bit, I like to be, you know what, I am open to anything and everything that's willing to show up. And I know that I'm going to be ready for it when it gets here. And so I kind of make a lot of decisions based on what feels good. And that's not necessarily a tactic that works for everybody. Some people are very number oriented and that helps them focus. I tend to be more of a like creativity focused person, and that kind of opens me up to new ideas and new ways to bring more business to Kula, new ideas, new products. There's a lot of Kulas out there though, and that is so exciting to me. And what's even cooler is that some of the original folks who supported Kula Cloth, like who literally have the Kulas that I sold in the very beginning that I made by hand, they still have them and they still use them. And like, they will email me and say, you know what, I still have the Kula Cloth that you made, Anastasia. And that's so cool.
Well, I think that's such a cool thing about, you kind of mentioned this as you were starting off Kula, of like, not necessarily like knowing the pitfalls that you could run into, and that there's like a certain freedom that provides of like running a company in a way that you want to, because you don't know what the alternative is, because you don't have some like foundational background in business. And like, yeah, that means that you make decisions based on intuition and feel and gut, but it creates this thing that is incredibly organic and it feels real. And like, I mean, anyone just needs to go on your Instagram to like know how like approachable you all are in terms of your messaging. And it just, yeah, I mean, like you've sold hundreds of thousands of Kula Cloths and like you all feel like a friend, you know?
Yeah. Well, and like I think the important thing about that too is that it's like genuine. I mean, I like genuinely care about people. And yes, I'm running a business and I never try to hide that. But like being a business owner and then also being friends with the people who are your customers, like those two things can happen. Like some of my closest friends had started out as my customers, and are still my customers. And I am a close friend to some of my other friends who run businesses. And I think approaching exactly what you said, Lloyd, about approaching this with no knowledge, which is exactly what I did. I have no background in business whatsoever. I've always been very entrepreneurial, but I have a Latin degree. I was pre-med in college. I have no textile experience, nothing. But because of that, I had no limits on what was possible. And what's really interesting is that years after I kind of got Kula started, somebody made a comment to me about, oh, factories, won't work with you, or no textile mill is going to talk to you. You're too small. And I remember thinking to myself, thank goodness that I did not have that idea planted into my mind early on, because I was on the phone talking with like the CEO of like a textile company, telling them my idea with such a passion that they wanted to support me. It did not matter that I did not meet their minimum order requirements. They were like, this woman is stoked about her product. We're going to give her a shot. And, the one factory that I work with and have been working with for 5 years now, they told me later that they hadn't accepted new customers in years, but that there was just something about my energy. And they were like, I don't know why, but we're going to work with this person. And when you go into a situation with like no pre-limiting beliefs about what's going to happen, that's when really good stuff can start to happen.
Definitely. And I'm gonna use the talk about factory to segue a little bit into talking about the specifics around the Kula Cloth. I think that's also interesting, like not having any limits. Like the original P cloth that you're using was just a blue microfiber cloth. I think at this point the Kula Cloth is, I'd say, like a pretty advanced piece of gear as far as the different things that are going on with it and thought processes. Can you kind of run us through the evolution of the product from that blue rag to where we are now, and what is all contained within the magic of the Kula Cloth?
Yeah. So when I first started making them, my original idea was I was going to have, a piece of waterproof fabric and a piece of absorbent fabric, and they were going to be serged together. So kind of sewn together like a pillow, but that tends to kind of pillow out a little bit, and there's space in the middle that kind of, you could pull those two pieces of fabric apart, which I also thought was maybe a little bit problematic. Like if it got snagged, it would be more likely to rip. But that's what I started as. It was two pieces of fabric sewed together with reflective thread around the edge. And the reflective thread was something that I personally sourced. Everybody that I had talked to told me I needed to do a reflective heat transfer, and I was adamant. I was like, nope, that's going to peel off or come off in the wash. They always do. There has to be a reflective thread out there. And I found a company that makes it. It's extremely expensive. It's about $80 a spool for this thread. The thread actually has like these tiny little beads of glass in it. It's like super high tech. And in fact, I am their only customer who buys this thread. It's wild. So I bought this thread, started designing the product, and originally, I was designing it and kind of giving it out to my friends to test. And in the early days of Kula Cloth, this is sort of silly to admit, but the absorbent side, I was using this like off-white fabric. Well, that got vetoed like hella quickly. Like, just imagine like, a pea cloth with like an off-white fabric. I mean, people are already like a little bit squeamish. No, 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 no. All my friends were like, "What are you thinking, Anastasia? This is idiotic. We do not want an off-white fabric." So the off-white fabric was vetoed. Then I needed to come up with a strap and kind of a system for snapping it to your backpack. And I wanted it to be able to snap to the backpack and then also snap to itself so that it could keep it clean, because that was one of the issues that I had with just using a pea cloth, is it would just attach to my backpack. I never knew which side I had used. And then also I would lay my pack down on the ground in the dirt. Now I'm taking dirt from a trail and using that as a pea cloth, which felt a little bit unclean. So I thought, well, if I can sort of close the pea cloth and snap it closed, then it's going to stay cleaner. And then also, whatever side you have pea on, it's not going to like be touching your backpack. Then I started researching fabrics. Initially, when I designed it, I was just using some random absorbent fabric that I bought. But I eventually started working with a textile company in the US to manufacture a custom fabric that is absorbent, like super absorbent fibers. It's specifically designed for hygiene. And then it's also treated with silver ions. And the silver ions are antimicrobial. The important thing about the silver ions is that they're different than silver nanoparticles. These are things you learn when you own a pea cloth company. Silver nanoparticles can be dangerous or unhealthy for septic systems. They can disrupt septic systems, but the ions, if any of them ever sort of wash off in your laundry, they basically just become inert and it doesn't hurt your septic system. So I kind of narrowed down the fabric. And then what I figured out through a lot of talking to textile folks is that you can actually take that waterproof fabric and laminate it using heat to the absorbent fabric, so that now you have basically two different pieces of fabric kind of made into a sandwich, and that eliminates that kind of pillowcase effect of having this sort of floppy looking cloth. And so you end up with this really high-tech piece of fabric that is exorbitantly expensive per yard. I'm embarrassed to say, like people who are into fabric would be absolutely stunned to know how much this fabric costs per yard. But I ended up with this fabric that is essentially white on one side, black on the other. And then the next part of it was trying to figure out, okay, now that I have that, how do I get a print on it? Like, I had no idea. So I learned about this process called sublimation, where they basically print a design on a piece of paper, and then using heat, they kind of press the design into the fabric. And so it becomes embedded. It never fades. You aren't going to have dye or ink leaking anywhere. It's just like a permanent transfer to the fabric itself. And then we added the reflective thread on the corner of the Kula instead of on the entire edge of the Kula, because I wanted it to be able to be seen on both sides if you are hanging your Kula up to dry in the middle of the night, for instance, and you're looking for it with a headlamp. And, the production of the Kula Cloth over time has improved drastically. We've upgraded the snap machine. In the beginning, we had some quality issues with the snap machine because we were using this sort of rigged snap press with like a hydraulic foot pedal to apply the snaps. And the factory that I work with bought a automated snap machine that gives a consistent pressure every single time they apply a snap. But it's gone from a product that I sort of sewed this, it just literally looked like the most ugly washcloth that you could ever imagine, into sort of this beautiful piece of gear that has art on it, and people are proud to put it on their backpack because it's beautiful. It connects them with the artist. It connects them with different causes. We use the Kulas to donate money to organizations out there that are making the outdoors more accessible for people. And, you know, I guess the last thing I would want to add is that before I did this, I knew nothing about how to do this. Absolutely nothing. Like if you had asked me, how do you make a Kula cloth? I would have had no idea. And I think it was Steve Jobs who said that you can never connect the dots forward. You can only connect them backwards. And you just have to believe that something can be done and start taking little steps. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense now. But, Kula Cloth.
That's my favorite part
Yeah.
about that story is like you saw something, you're like, I want to make this happen. And then you didn't think about what's the textile industry in general is doing or what other people are doing. You're like, I'm just gonna make it happen. And
then I did.
I love the example of the thread. Yeah, and then you did. It's like the thread, no one's using the thread because it's expensive, but it's the perfect fit for the Kula cloth. And now you guys are their only
I'm their only
customer.
customer.
It's a really neat process. Yeah.
So yeah,
And that idea of like,
oh, go ahead, Lloyd.
or just like that idea of like not operating under fear. And I think like when people are thinking about starting businesses or diving into something new, they think about like, this isn't the most perfect iteration of itself. And because of that, yeah, you don't launch into something where it's so clear. I mean, hearing your story that like you started off with a really great product that people are still using some of the original, prototypes. And it has evolved a ton over the years into something that is, a better version of itself. But if you would to have started to begin with, you would have never materialized into where you are right now.
Yeah, well, you have to go through all the steps in order to get to whatever the next one is going to be. It doesn't just poof appear. There's Kula Cloth. It was a long process of figuring out what this was going to look like, and it was not always pretty. I mean, the first Kula Cloths had ribbons that that I cut with scissors, but people believed in that product enough to buy it, and they started using it, and that was sort of exciting for me to be like, you know what? I mean, I have a photograph of me shipping out the very first Kula Cloth order. I just thought it was like, the biggest day of my life, right? Like I'm standing there by my front door, like holding this one package. And I still, almost 5 years into it now, I still get excited sending out orders to people. Like that's every order that comes in, there's a human behind that order who's going to take my product out on the trail, and it's going to hopefully make their experience better out there. Like that is such an honor to be able to say.
I imagine you've seen a lot of questions and had a lot of conversations with people about the Kula cloth. For people who, you mentioned the squeamishness factor, for people who might be squeamish with the idea of a pea cloth versus toilet paper, how do you kind of approach it with those people? Because I think I love the Kula cloth idea, and everyone in my life I know who uses one has fallen in love with it. So I just want to kind of get the info out there about the product.
So I definitely think that if you feel squeamish about it, that's totally okay, because I felt squeamish about the idea. I would say that if you aren't 100% sold on the idea and you want to test it out, you could do something like I did and just take a piece of fabric that you have at your house, right? You don't have to make an investment for that, and just test it out and see if you like it. And if you do, then you could try out a Kula and see if you like it. I think what most people find when they actually use it is that it's easy to use. It makes them feel cleaner and drier on the trail, and therefore more comfortable, therefore more able to enjoy their experience without having any concerns about hygiene or like feeling disgusting out there. And so it overwhelmingly becomes a positive experience. When I was starting Kula, I kind of did these unofficial little surveys of the hiking group that I was running on Facebook at the time. And one of the things that people really were adamant about was they wanted it to be antimicrobial. And the antimicrobialness isn't for the urine, it's for like all the other stuff in the environment. The laying it down on the ground or, touching it with your hands. I think the other advantage that Kula has is that because one side of the Kula is waterproof, you aren't like getting urine on your hands. And then the antimicrobial treatment of the Kula does make it odor resistant. So now that being said, nothing is like odor proof. It's odor resistant. I always tell people it depends on your hydration level, whether or not you've eaten asparagus that day. and and there's other factors, but for the most part, if people are using the Kula cloth properly, which is literally just to squat and pee like normal, and then you simply use the Kula just to pat dry. I will sometimes recommend to people just to sort of hold it in place until you just kind of feel like you're dried off and comfortable, and then go on your way. You snap it back to your pack. Overwhelmingly, people say that it changes their hiking experience. And I think once they try it out for themselves, they will have a hard time imagining hiking without it, is the typical consensus.
Yeah, well, I'd be fascinated to hear, Anastasia. I mean, I feel like the journey for Kula has been something that has been amazing to witness. I mean, again, from kind of our first interaction on the OR stairs, I think my feeling was definitely like, wow, Anastasia is a force of nature, and I am like excited to see what happens with Kula. Yeah, everything from the Kula Academy to the Kula Marketplace to like all of the neat collaborations that you guys have going on to new products beyond just the pea cloth. Like, I you guys haven't done everything that there is to do as a company, but it feels like you guys have done a lot. Where does like Kula go? Where does Kula keep growing? Where do you keep where do you find like new areas of inspiration to keep growing Kula?
So I honestly find a lot of inspiration from doing things that sort of keep me connected to that creative side of myself. And I do a lot of like visioning of what I want Kula to look like and how it feels. And maybe this is getting into the woo a little bit, but I think about, Kula in 10 years, and I've envisioned our Kula building as this like hiking hub here close to the Mountain Loop Highway. And I can literally see this building in my mind. I can see everything that Kula is doing. I can see our classes, our events, like the people who are working for me. And it would be really easy to look at where I am right now, which is running a fulfillment center out of a 200 square foot space, and to feel, a little bit forlorn about the lack of this like massive fulfillment center. And what I ask myself all the time is, how does that best version of Kula feel? How does the best version of Anastasia feel? Like, what does that all look and feel like in my mind? And then from there, once I have that very clear, I ask myself, what can I do right now to feel those things exactly where I am? Because if you say to yourself, I will feel successful, happy, and free once the building is built, well, now you're putting some separation between you and the building. So I will say, okay, well, what can I do right now to feel happy, successful, and free? And a lot of the times, those things are riding my motorcycle, dancing, painting, meditation, giving generously to people, doing fun events, being outside and hiking. And it sounds a little non-traditional that those are sort of like the foundation of like the things that I choose to do. But it's when I do those things that like the ideas and the inspiration or the impulse for whatever move I need to take next arrives. When you're out living in alignment with the best version of yourself, it always seems like you're just magically in the right place at the right time to meet the right person or see the right thing or get the right idea. And that is really what I put my focus on. And when I do that, when I don't let myself sort of move into fear and scarcity mindset, which I do sometimes. I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't, because anybody who says that is probably not telling the truth. Um, when I can keep myself as close to those feelings as possible, that's when ideas start to flow and I get inspired and I am creating new products or coming up with fun content or ideas. And so most of the flow and the creation of Kula is very organic and natural. Like you are literally seeing, it's like Kula is creating itself. And I'm just sort of like waiting for the inspiration to show up and then being like, okay, we're going to do this or we're going to do this. And if you had asked me, if I had tried to do a traditional business plan for Kula, I think I would have closed the company down because my brain doesn't work like that. And like, how could I have possibly, I imagine myself coming up with a business plan that said something like, okay, you are going to dance for 868 days. You are going to start a dance experiment with like 100 other people. You are going to have a creepy cat as a mascot. You are going to start an academy and, do all of these silly things that have ultimately made Kula what it is. Like I never could have dreamed of those things. Like those came from a really authentic, true, and genuine place of not trying to get anything. They just came from a place of just pure fun. And I feel like I'm so lucky because I just get excited about seeing what's next. And, we launched a line of underwear. We have a new product. It's like called a pocket. It's like an antimicrobial bag. We're working on some other new products to add into our lineup. And, that type of stuff, like designing things is really exciting for me because now I kind of know how to do it because I'm working with pattern designers. And I genuinely, it's like I know where I'm going, but it's always surprising how I get there, if that makes sense.
No, I love that. And I feel like that the notion of like goals can be incredibly grounding, but they can be incredibly limiting.
Yeah.
And that's like a weird dichotomy between those two things. I don't know. I don't think that that's too woo.
Okay, good.
I'm a bit of a concrete thinker, but I do think that like, I don't know if I particularly like, I don't know how I feel about ideas like fate or destiny, but I do think that, you are constantly responsible for like thousands of tiny micro decisions. And those things influence where you go, where your ideas flow to. And when you look back on it, you're like, how did I get here? And it's like, well, it's the culmination of all of these little decisions that you make, and you make them in positive ways. You make them in ways that try to, have you feel genuine, happy presentness in the moment. And those you kind of just hope manifest in a direction that feels positive. And that to me is such like a wonderful thing of, hearing you say like, I don't know exactly where it's going, but I feel like if my process is a certain way, it'll end in a way that feels creative. It feels dynamic. It feels like, evolving. And that's really that.
Yeah. There's a great book called The Slight Edge, and it is about the power of compounding positive actions, little steps. And that's what I've sort of discovered with Kula is that it's not really, I'm not making huge plays every day. I'm not, doing stuff that it would be difficult to anybody. It's being consistent and just maintaining like this belief in where we're going and doing what feels good and focusing on what I want to create rather than what I don't want to create, which is a really little shift, but it's so easy to spend, it's really, really easy to look at things that aren't going right and to put all your focus on those. But then you're problem focused. And I have learned that when I'm solution focused, the solutions tend to arrive. And it is and just like a micro twist in your mind of switching over from a I don't want this to what I want to create is, and then looking in that direction, not being oblivious to problems and not taking action, but taking action from a place of being more in alignment with like there is a solution and I'm looking forward to seeing what that is, even if I don't know what it is.
I'm curious with the people that you work with. Like I love your approach to creativity and running the business. Do you hire people or work with people who have a similar mindset, or do you have people who are maybe more kind of like that the concrete, have a more of a concrete focus, or think differently, I guess? Like how does that work at Kula?
Yeah, everybody is so different. I think I definitely attract people who are at least somewhat open to a non-traditional way of looking at things. And I'm probably an interesting person to work for because I really encourage all of the folks who work for me to spend a lot of time doing things that make them feel good. I give them lots of time off. I, don't micromanage anybody. I prioritize them going outside and hiking. I do everything that I can to support all of their creative endeavors, whether that is helping them buy gear to get outside when it's not in their budget, or supporting them climbing their first mountain. Like those are the things that I think as a boss, like my job is to help the folks who work for me realize their dreams. My dream is Kula, but I realize that like, the people who work for me, their dream might not be to work for Kula Cloth forever. But the more that I can encourage them to be the best version of themselves, then we all work together for this one goal and everybody sort of congeals in a really beautiful way. So I feel like they all get on board. And what's fun is we have a little vision board in our office. And I ask the folks that work with me in the fulfillment center here to write things on the vision board of like what they want to create in their life. And at first, I think they probably were like, oh, Anastasia, it's a little nuts. She's having us write all this little stuff on the board. But what's really fun is like a couple of the things that they wrote on the board started happening. And I remember coming out there to this vision board one day. They weren't working. I was there in the evening. And I came out and I noticed that a couple of the employees had like written more things on their board of like stuff that they wanted to accomplish in their lives. And it was just like the most satisfying thing for me to be like, it makes me teary eyed just thinking about it, like that they were like starting to dream for their life too. I cry like thinking about them. But that to me is like such a gift to be able to give to them, and it's through a pea cloth company, which makes it even funnier.
That's amazing. That's the when you can inspire people that you work with, that work for you, as well as take that and broaden it out to the rest of the world. That's pretty special. I think Kula's doing an amazing job with that.
They are all so proud to work for Kula, and it just, the other day, Kula had a little, well, it wasn't that little, but it was an article where Kula got featured in CNN, and that's a pretty big deal to a little company like mine to be a trending article on CNN. And all of my employees, were just busting their butt trying to pack up the orders that we had, and I just saw them like, screenshotting the article and like sending it to their friends. And, I could just tell like how excited they are to be a part of it. And for me, the fact that like they get to be a part of something that they feel is special is just so rewarding for me.
That's amazing. And I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time, Anastasia. This has been a great podcast. I think we've touched on a lot of different things, which has been really cool. It's not necessarily been just focused on gear or running a business, or we kind of went everywhere, and I love the conversation.
Me too.
Any kind of closing thoughts from you, Lloyd or Anastasia, before Lloyd drops some potential gear sneak peeks for Garage Pro Gear?
Well, I'm just impressed that
Nothing's from
that
me.
you guys got me to cry, because that's one of the things that I'm known for, is like crying on Instagram. So I feel like I am probably the only human on earth who could cry about a pea cloth, and I just love that for me.
Well, I'm glad that can be a both a visual and an auditory
Me
experience
too.
for folks here on the podcast.
Oh, I was just going to say that it was just a great conversation. And I think if I was to sort of end with anything, it would be that I just hope that Kula's story can inspire anybody out there that, if they have an idea, it doesn't have to be a piece of gear. It could be anything. You want to write a blog, you want to go climb a mountain, you want to, do anything. Like it's never going to be the right time, because the only time is now. And, I'm somebody who doesn't have any special skills that anybody out there doesn't have. I think all of us have this like infinite potential within us. And so I just hope that other people can hear Kula's story and not think like, oh, Anastasia, got lucky or has this special skills, but maybe they can think like, oh, Anastasia did it and I can do something too. And I really hope that for other people, because creating something is just such a beautiful experience that I think everybody deserves.
Yeah. And especially creating something in a way where you feel fulfilled as a person. I think in today's hustle mentality, economy, and everything, people feel like they have to be working all the time, 18 hours a day, 80 hours a week, in order to be successful and happy. But I think by the sounds of it, the approach that you take is a little bit more balanced, and you find success in taking those breaks and doing things that you love, which is amazing to hear.
That is probably the most important part of being successful, is knowing when not to work.
Exactly. All right, Lloyd, do you have any sneak peeks for gear that's coming down the pipeline from Garage Growing Gear over the next month?
There's a couple. I don't remember what we talked about last episode, but it feels like right now, I think going into summer, feels like there's a lot of folks that are starting to try to launch new brands or come out with new products. So yeah, a bunch of kind of smaller brands for us, which is exciting. I don't know if we talked to Justin in the email about it, but Ounce Designs is got some. They have some shelters that are on the way that I'm really excited about. Got 3 different pack makers: Virga packs, Neighborhood packs, and Pilgrim Ultralight.
Okay, I think you mentioned 2 of those, but Pilgrim Ultralight, I think, is
They won.
new one. Yeah,
They're still like in progress. So with a lot of these brands, like it takes a little while from conversation to stuff actually arriving at Garage Ground. And then so a couple brands coming off of Etsy. Jericho Gear is one that comes to mind. And then new and different stuff kind of hitting all the time. There's like the new shorts and skirts from Palante that are really cool. They're designed in collaboration with this European designer who runs a functional clothing lab, and their designs are so cool. You never really think that someone could reinvent something as simple as a hiking skirt or shorts, but effective, really cool.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, looking forward to it. And thanks again, Anastasia. Lloyd, we'll see you next month for the next month's Garage Growing Gear Partner episode. Hope both of you had a great weekend, and hopefully can get outside for some hiking.
Thanks, Justin.